Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to the Pervasive Media Studio Lunchtime Talk. These talks are live every Friday, both here in the building and live online. Hi, if you're watching us online. So whether you're in Bristol or you're far away, you can join in the conversation. My name is Martin O'Leary. I'm the head of studio here. I'm a white man in my 40s, long hair and a beard, wearing a baby blue wool jumper today. Every Friday, we throw open the doors of the Pervasive Media Studio for Open Studio Friday, where we offer you the chance to spend some time in our space by hot desking alongside our residents and staff from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So especially a big welcome to anyone who's new to the studio. Can anyone who's new to the studio put your hand up? Nobody today. Okay, well, if you're watching online and you're new to the studio, you probably want to know what we are. What is the Pervasive Media Studio? We're a diverse and collaborative community exploring creativity and technology, everything from comedy to coding and product development to performance art. And we're a partnership between Watershed, where we are right now, UE Bristol and the University of Bristol, and we're funded by Arts Council England as well as by generous donations from members of the public just like yourselves. More on that later. We offer studio space, including desks, meeting rooms, events and opportunities, all for free for our residents as part of a spirit of generosity and mutual exchange. And most of all, we're a space for people to take risks with embryonic ideas and to make some time for collaboration. So just a few notes before we begin. Please do feel free to move around. There's a kitchen back there. You can grab a cup of tea or coffee or a glass of water, anything like that. If you need to take a break at any point, we have a quiet space just next to this space. So my left to your right, just around the corner there, there's a little room. It's got some sofas and bean bags. It's reasonably well soundproofed, at least from in here. You can still hear the street. If you hear a fire alarm, that's probably real. We're not expecting a fire drill. So the fire exits are at the other end of the studio. So again, my left, your right, at either end. If you hear a fire alarm, the studio team will direct you to them. And then there are accessible toilets, including baby change, over there in the corridor just next to the kitchen. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. So for those of you who are watching online, please pop your questions into the YouTube chat. Laughton is here. He will be your voice in the room today. If you're in the building, please raise your hand the old-fashioned way, and we will send around a microphone so the folks at home can hear what you're saying. You can get news on all of our future talks by heading to watershed.co.uk/studio or watershed.co.uk/takepart, which is our new section of the website, including all of the exciting activity that we do, which isn't the cinema program. Or you can check us out on any of our social medias, at Pervasive Media Studio at mastodon.social on Mastodon, at pmstudiouk.bsky.social on Blue Sky, at Pervasive Media Studio on Instagram, or look up Pervasive Media Studio on LinkedIn, because I have no idea how you read out a LinkedIn address. All right, today's talk is part of Home, a year of making, experiencing, and sharing ideas of home. For the past year, Watershed has been hosting a program of films, immersive art, talks and workshops that explore the many different ways in which people find, make, imagine, long for, and escape home. You can find out more about the whole program online at watershed.co.uk/home. All right, our speakers for today are Rhiannon Craft and Lara Luna-Bartley. Rhiannon is a sociologist and circus performer at Cardiff. No, not a sociologist and circus performer at Cardiff University. A sociologist at Cardiff University and a circus performer separately. I've told to correct that. With experience of living in vehicles as well as carrying out research with vehicle-dwelling communities. Lara is a PhD student at UE Bristol's Digital Cultures Research Centre, whose work explores finance as a form of sorcery through participatory performance and rituals. Today they're going to talk about laundry justice, which is a co-produced transdisciplinary research project exploring off-grid laundry practices and knowledge with vehicle dwellers in Bristol, using circus art as a form of critical making and inquiry. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Rhiannon and Lara.
I wonder why it's not showing up anymore and whether that matters, the slides.
Would you like slides? It probably does matter if you do.
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much.
Well, I don't know.
There.
Excellent.
No.
Oh, thanks. So, yeah, my name's Lara. In terms of how I look, I sometimes describe myself as looking like what a child draws an adult woman to look like, kind of brightly coloured clothes, long, scraggly hair. But yeah, about laundry justice. So the original idea for laundry justice came in 2021 following this very tedious conversation about whether it was better to wash your clothes at 40 degrees with eco laundry liquid or 30 degrees with more toxic chemical kind of washing liquids. And I was very premenstrual, very annoyed by this conversation. And I was like, this is not the spectrum of possibility. Why do we reduce things so much? And I contacted the University of Bristol's Brigstow Institute, and they fund transdisciplinary research groups with an understanding that there's more knowledge formed at the margins by necessity. And I asked whether there was maybe a possibility of working with vehicle dwellers that presumably have less access to washing machines, and whether we might learn something about laundry practices. And they introduced me to Lizzie Harrison, who's here, who's a sustainable fashion and laundry researcher, and is currently also a senior lecturer in fashion textiles at UWE. And that was great. I really enjoyed, that was a brilliant meeting. And I contacted a friend of mine called Josh White, who was part of setting up an organisation called Vehicles for Change that was designed to protect and advance the rights of vehicle dwellers. And Josh put us in touch with Rhiannon, who was also a co-founder of Vehicles for Change, and who can now say something about, so this is us, the team, and this is Vehicles for Change.
Thank you. So interestingly, actually, the last time I was here was for a Vehicles for Change meeting, so it feels quite nice to come back round full circle. So we first set up just before the pandemic. So does anyone in the room or online remember the Greenbank Cemetery media moral panic of 2017?
I remember some of
Yeah, a few nods, yeah. So around that time, there was a lot of very inflammatory media reporting at a local and national level, and there were calls for a new policy to be made. And Bristol City Council made a new policy, and it was very focused on enforcement. And it was about regulating vehicle dwellers and assessing them as high or low impact, and choosing how quickly, essentially, they would then be cleared away and moved on away from wherever it was that they were parking their homes. And me and a group of vehicle dwellers got together and we thought, surely there needs to be some provision included in these policies as well. It's very enforcement heavy. How is this going to affect us and where we park our homes and our access to home? So that's where it came about from. It was from a reaction to a local enforcement policy, which was published in 2018 as a draft and then enforced in 2019. So we all got together and we rallied people up, and we really wanted to make some positive change in this area. And that was just before the pandemic. So we had just got the ball rolling. We were having meetings, including places like here, and we were trying to get some practical solutions off the ground. And one of the things we spoke about was access to land, and also access to facilities, including laundry facilities. And then the pandemic happened, and we ended up working, as a lot of us will know, very remotely, and we became quite tunnel visioned. There were people needing access to water quite urgently. Vehicle dwellers began to be viewed as a public health problem, and there were instances where people's caravans were quite literally being towed away while they were going and doing essential work as essential workers. So it was a real firefighting era where we were trying to help people's homes stay intact, because people were having their homes towed with their possessions being destroyed in the process. There was one quite disturbing situation where someone had taken their child to school and came back and their vehicle had been towed away. So it was a really serious time, and thankfully we managed to work with the council to stop that approach and move towards a more provision approach, which is where the first meanwhile sites then came into action. And we also managed to have a situation where those who weren't on meanwhile sites could be allowed to stay where they were, whether it was because they were getting access to facilities and forming bubbles with house dwellers, or because they were perhaps on squatted sites and being able to support each other there. So it was a really intense time. So that's where we came through with these meanwhile sites. And since then, meanwhile sites have remained being used in Bristol, and there is a new policy that we'll talk about later that has now incorporated meanwhile sites into that model, but there's a lot of work to be done still. So we'll talk a bit more about that later when we talk about the importance of this. But as it stands, there are still no laundry facilities on meanwhile sites, and there isn't actually any hot water either. So while it's a step in the right direction, there's a lot of work to be done, and that's why this work's been really important. So beyond Bristol, there is a sense that vehicle dwelling is growing. So that is why we really need to start talking about how people get access to basic amenities, because this is not something that's going away anytime soon.
And yeah, why is it growing?
Really good question. So people have been living in vehicles all over the world for a very long time. Nomadism is often facilitated by people living in some kind of vehicle, and that's been happening all over the world for a very long time. You could say it's quite a normal human behaviour in that respect. And obviously we've got whole cultures and traditions that have emerged, and new ones that continue to emerge around nomadism. But you also get increases in people living in vehicles as a form of self-help and self-provided housing when you have times of economic hardship as well. And that can look really different. For some people, that might be, okay, I'm going to live in my van and work full-time tactically so that I can get a mortgage. And then you get other end of the spectrum where people might actually find an abandoned caravan and sleep in it as an alternative to rough sleeping. So you also get growth in people living in vehicles, among other self-help strategies when you have economic difficulties. And in Bristol, that, as we all probably are aware, that situation is very pronounced. And that's why Bristol is such an interesting city to do this kind of research.
We came together, the four of us, as a team, and the first step for us to get the research going was to apply for Bristol's Ideas Exchange funding. And this is a small pot of money designed to pay people to design a research project, because Bristol works transdisciplinary with people that are not within the university system and therefore not salaried. And that was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it was a fund that was pushed for by an artist friend of mine called Alice Tatton Brown after she put a lot of time into a bid, an academic bid that was never sent. And she was like, can you start paying people for their time, please? But yeah, so we came together, we set up a democratic reading group, we'd go to each other's spaces, whether work or home spaces were appropriate and were practical, and we'd read things, I guess, because we were all coming from different backgrounds to try and get a sense of each other's worlds. And that process ended in a laundry workshop to which we invited other academics to feed into the bid. And yeah, and like I was saying, that time was about getting to know each other. It was about planning the project that we later did. And the project was always going to have a creative element. And we couldn't quite figure out what it was going to be, whether it was going to be a zine, or it was going to be a toolkit, or it was going to be an exhibition, or it was like... And we kept going round. There was one 2-hour meeting, we just went round in circles and circles and circles, kind of like a washing machine. And eventually, Rhi suggested we do Circus, and it was such a relief. Because it was like, oh yeah, that makes so much sense for reasons that you'll explain.
Yeah, so people live in vehicles for lots of different reasons. We talked a little bit already about the kind of cultural nomadism, and we've also talked about economic hardship. Also, some people have occupations that require them to move around a lot, so it doesn't really make sense, especially in the current climate, to be paying lots of rent when perhaps you work in a different city every night. Musicians and circus artists being perhaps quite an obvious example of that. So the travelling circus has always been quite a good example of vehicle dwelling, and actually, strangely, a very socially acceptable form of vehicle dwelling. I'll always remember one circus performer who lived in a vehicle explained how when he was parked up on the road for a gig, he would get so much harassment, but as soon as he told them he worked in the circus, then it would just change everything because he was an artist and he was legitimised for that reason. So it's an interesting art form to use in that respect, because it strangely has this power of offering social legitimacy to something that a lot of people don't think is legitimate. which in itself is, it's quite a messy, problematic reality. But when you're trying to create new narratives and change people's minds, art is very powerful, and Circus is very connected to vehicle dwelling, as a lot of people need vehicles in order to do their work. A lot of people actually will miss out on contracts if they don't have their own mobile accommodation to bring on the contract, which also has all its own problems as well, because it's not necessarily that easy for people to get access to their own motorised vehicle as well, due to costs and other reasons. Also, it's a more accessible output as well. We really wanted to make a piece of art and an output for the research that would be more accessible for people within and beyond the academy, rather than just producing another report that some people may enjoy reading, but some people will feel quite put off by. So it was also a good way of working through that as well. So that's why we went for it. And what we did is we did interviews, and then we took the themes from the interviews, shared them with the circus performers who all had lived experience living in vehicles as well. They then related those themes to their own experiences and made sketch circus theatre draft pieces with that.
Here's some examples. There's a video online that we can share as well. Yeah, I'll leave that one on. Yeah, so even before that stage of the interviews and the circus, just even telling people that we were doing a project about laundry, I learned a lot as there was a friend that did a talk here in March on AI and animism, and she said that gossip was one of her methods, and I was like, oh yeah, I love that. So yeah, so we heard about somebody, this guy apparently had never considered hanging his washing because he'd always use a dryer, and then he stayed at someone's house when they were hanging the washing. He was like, what are you doing? And that's quite, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to know if these things are true. Presumably it's true, because I don't know why someone would make up a story like that. But also I think what that story in particular speaks to is like a very extreme example of the disconnection, the loss of knowledge, the de-skilling that has come through the introduction of like convenience appliances and technologies into the home. And yeah, we also heard about someone's grandparents who in the winter would get sewn into woolen vests that were covered, I think, in goose fat, which, yeah, and the children would spend all winter in these little vests, which is, yeah, quite amazing. And I think that speaks to how much has changed in a couple of generations. And yeah, that's just some of what we heard. I'm sure you have your own stories.
Yeah, and it's interesting because for a lot of people living in vehicles, a lot of people actually do end up taking on more traditional ways of doing laundry, because if you're living in a vehicle without easy access to running water, you're going to have to improvise and find new ways of doing your laundry, or finding ways of perhaps not needing to do it as fast, and finding all these different workarounds. And that was one of my key findings through living as a vehicle dweller and through doing research with vehicle dwellers, is that there are a lot of skills involved, a lot of knowledge involved, and sometimes that even involves learning old traditions. So for example, one of this shot's actually, it's really great, this one's up now, because actually this came out of a conversation about traditional horse-drawn washing methods, hence the bucket here. So this was a process of one of our participants had more knowledge of that method and actually shared it with the other vehicle dwellers, and even brought in a jam pot, which historically a lot of travellers use in order to do their laundry, because you can put them on the burner and keep them warm to warm up the water. So they're really, really practical. And actually some of the other vehicle dwellers didn't even know about this. So it actually was quite an interesting exchange where there were people sharing skills through this conversation as well. But yeah, a lot of these skills are really essential in order to survive. So it's not just laundry, it's also like knowing about the materials that you're living around, knowing the basics about electrics, legal systems as well. There's so much knowledge you learn, and you have to learn, but out of necessity when you start living in a vehicle. But also a lot of that knowledge about working around lack of access, it really illuminates the difference in having knowledge when you're aware that you have finite resources, because obviously we are aware on a like global scale, we are dealing with finite resources, and that becomes really obvious when you don't have them on tap. So it's really interesting how people who have that awareness have developed whole ways of moving around their homes and organising their homes in order to accommodate that, which is where, yeah, as Lara pointed out, like that's where house dwellers can perhaps learn something, because actually the convenience of a lot of housing, not all, because obviously everyone lives in different housing arrangements, can't generalise, but it's a lot of people are under this illusion a lot of the time that they have infinite resources because of how the house is structured and how they interact with it, which is very different to someone living off-grid in a vehicle.
Yeah, and so one of the things I'm interested in is like modern mythologies, and in terms of my PhD research into finance, yeah, so I'm interested in the way in which modern myths kind of help sustain absurd systems. And yeah, so within my research into finance, as a former sorcery, I've been looking at the invisible hand, and through my research into the invisible hand of the market, which is like this mystical kind of entity, I learned something which is a bit of a tangent, but also related, which is that Adam Smith, which is almost like this Jesus person within economics, as in the kind of founding father, but also someone whose ideas have been very misconstrued. Apparently when Adam Smith talked about the free market, which he did a bit, he wasn't talking about a market free from regulation, but a market free from rent. So yeah, one of the projects that is in my head and I've never quite done anything with is like trying to reappropriate that terminology of the free marketeer. And yeah, I just wanted to mention it because I guess it has implications when we're thinking about home as an overriding theme. But yeah, in terms of this project, one of the things I learned through Lizzie's research was that this, the idea that the washing machine is this liberation technology is complete nonsense. Women spend, on average, just as much time doing laundry as before the introduction of washing machines, and that's because we wash our clothes a lot more now, partly because there's an expectation that, of smelling of, I guess, laundry liquids or whatever. But also because clothes are a lot, just like plasticky clothes, they're not as breathable and they need washing a lot more. And yeah, there's the other kind of, within the domestic setting, like one of the other myths that drives me slightly mad is when people tell you that dishwashers are more efficient and use less water, which as a statement doesn't make any sense because everyone washes up in very different ways. But yeah, I'm interested in how myth kind of, in this context, is obscuring the loss of skill and the disconnection, that's interesting to me. But anyway, there's a tension at the heart of this project, which I want to name explicitly, that's always been there since the beginning. When I first approached Josh with the idea about, like, oh, maybe we could learn something about laundry from vehicle dwellers, his assumption was that I was looking to actually set up facilities, maybe air styles facilities, and provide access, which hadn't even occurred to me. But obviously has become important, an important aim of the project, to not just celebrate the ingenuity that comes from difficulty, but also try and make things easier because, it's also kind of nice to live within this myth and not think about these things too much.
Yeah, and also, it's so sometimes I think you have to think of it as like, how do people want to spend their time as well? And when you're being continually displaced and moved around, you're in this process of always like making and unmaking home all the time. And it's always typically, if you're getting moved, that's when obviously you've got to go and do your laundry, isn't it? So, and some people don't have cars, so that might involve getting on a bus with a huge bin bag of laundry and dragging it to the laundrette, which is kind of the last thing you need when you're being told that you need to move within 2 days, or you're going to have to go to court, or so, because that is the reality for a lot of people living in vehicles. So it's not illegal to live in a vehicle somewhere unless there's an injunction or a law specifying that. But if you are told to move, and there is a court order that you have to move and you don't move, then it does become a criminal offence. So it is serious. So yeah, this kind of continual making and unmaking of home can make it really difficult sometimes to enjoy those moments where you enjoy the slowness and you enjoy these alternative methods. And also, while some people take pride in them and enjoy them, a lot of, as I was mentioning earlier, a lot of people actually are living in vehicles as an alternative, for example, to rough sleeping. Like, not everyone actually even wants to be in a vehicle long term, and then some people do just want to have easier access to facilities. So it's so diverse. So yeah, that's why it's really important managing this tension of celebrating people's knowledge and wisdom, but also recognising actually people are getting displaced a lot. Why are so many people actually being forced to move or forced into a way of living they actually don't want to live? Because not everyone wants to live in a vehicle. That is the truth of it. A lot of people are doing it out of necessity. So that's why it's always, yeah, tricky, but really essential to manage both the kind of forks of the project.
Cool. So yeah, so through the interviews that we conducted, we uncovered, probably what you could describe as a wealth of practices relating not just to laundry, but to garment care in general. And it went from everything of people saying they would air their clothes a lot, sometimes before washing or instead of washing, or washing clothes in the water that you've just showered in, like collecting that water, and then in terms of the like DIY engineering, it was just amazing in terms of people using the engines to heat the water, which would then be used for the shower, that would then go into the washing machine sometimes, or like all kinds of different iterations. But also in terms of people choosing to wear natural fabrics because they're so much more breathable and they need washing a lot less, spot cleaning, using panty liners strategically, what other things? I mean, just a massive array of things, and that showed much more connectedness to the process. And through the circus workshop and in using that method, because it made sense, but it's only till you use afterwards that you understand the particular way in which it's valuable. What really came through is the physicality of laundry, the precarity, and also the mutuality, which maybe comes through in this photo that we can see. Well, if it decides, I can give it a go if you want to say some more about the mutual aid stuff.
Yeah, so again, through my research and through my everyday life, mutual aid comes up a lot. So people rely on each other a lot when they're living on the road. People often look out for each other, whether it's if people are experiencing harassment from locals, for example, people quite often will park together and look after each other in that way. People that have access to motorised vehicles might help people get their laundry done, like by doing car runs to the laundrette with those who live with them on sites that don't have access. So, and also with sharing knowledge, like what we were talking about earlier, there was someone in the group that had their tactics they'd learned as someone who grew up living in vehicles, and then shared that with other people. And I personally have really relied on the help I've had from other people, whether it's through being given practical tips or given physical safety through numbers. There's so much mutual aid that makes vehicle dwelling and survival possible. But that's not to say that everyone gets that equally. You know, a lot of people actually might be quite upset to hear about that because they might not feel supported. Not everybody is getting that support. So that's also really important to highlight as well. Like, it isn't this kind of like utopian existence where everyone's living off grid and helping each other. There is a lot of that going on, but some people get helped more than others. There are always politics underlying how mutual aid is distributed. So that's always important to bear in mind as well. But the key being that it was such an important part of doing laundry, but also other elements of everyday survival for people living in vehicles.
So thinking about this talk and thinking about the project in relation to home, got us thinking a little bit as well about home institutions, fields of expertise, and the ways in which we create groups. The groups that we create almost become homes as well in a way. So yeah, Brigstow grants require at least one Bristol University academic. And when I was introduced to Lizzie, it was like, wow, it was like a little miracle, because I felt like I'd spent years on, on trying to work with Brigstow with lots of different ideas, but never quite knowing someone in Bristol University that I could work with. So that was amazing. And then, funnily enough, Lizzie quickly moved to UWE. So we were back to square one, but also with a few more friends. And someone called Jess Paddock came on board as our principal investigator, which allowed us to move forward with the project. And I wanted to name her also because her research is quite relevant to the overarching theme of home. So her focus was on the way normative ideas and material infrastructure together shape what we do in the home, and whether this is eating or cooking or laundry. So that's what she was looking at. And in terms of institutional home, like of the 12 years I've been in Bristol, 11 have been here at the UWE kind of School of Arts. And it made me think about how, some of it is bureaucratic, but also there's that sometimes, we belong to institutions longer than any of the houses or other groups that we're a part of. And in terms of also domains, like we're all four of us, we're in different areas, and we've kind of tried to tread carefully when in each other's worlds or each other's fields of expertise, kind of sticking to the edge. Inevitably, there's the occasional trampling inadvertently, and I want to name that as well, because I've ended up looking at it in my PhD research. Some people would refer to it as epistemic trespass, and it can feel like sometimes a little bit dislocating and a little bit maybe even aggravating. But I think, when compared, this kind of inadvertent, when compared to the deliberate and traumatic and relentless displacement that a lot of vehicle dwellers experience, it feels like a ridiculous tiny luxury problem to have. But I just named it for that reason.
Yeah, and that's a good way to lead on to the next part as well. So I already spoke a bit about the difficulties of this continuing unmaking of home, largely triggered by the state. I don't know if any of you have heard of the concept of domicide, which is the deliberate destruction of homes as a mechanism of state control. Definitely feels that way sometimes. And there's a concerning trajectory at the moment as well. While there's a lot of positive work being done in the areas, a lot of you may know already, the Police Act came out in 2022, making trespass a more serious criminal offence when it becomes criminal. Really important that it's known that if you are not a criminal automatically by trespassing still. It's only if you're given a court order to leave and you don't leave. So that's really important to know. But the point being that the consequences and the punishments and the sentencing has increased significantly in recent years, which is frightening. Fortunately, it's not actually being used very much. I keep an eye on this, keeping in touch with lawyers that work in this field, and as far as they're aware, it's not being used very much at all, like a few times since it's been introduced. So that's kind of reassuring, but it's still quite concerning that legislation was put through that then actually no one on the ground really agrees with using. It says quite a lot, really, doesn't it? And then at the same time, we've seen lots of injunctions being made. So an injunction in this respect is when a certain behaviour is banned from a whole area. So effectively, whole groups of people can be banned from an area. So if you say no one living in vehicles, it's not that different to saying no vehiclers, no travellers, no gypsies. That is what that encompasses. So it's really serious. Thankfully, there's been a lot of good case law that's helped kind of bat that back, but it continues to be this ping pong in higher courts, as with lots of other areas of law. So it's a really important time also because, as a lot of you may have seen in the papers recently, there's been a lot of inflammatory media reporting again. This time it's not Greenbank, this time it's Clifton Downs. And there's been an injunction sought after on the Downs, which now is going through court at the moment. We don't have a decision on that yet. The trial's yet to happen in the spring. So as it stands, there's a lot of very oppressive enforcement already there in the back pockets of authorities if they wish to use it, and not very many sites being authorised and set up. In the meantime, a lot of people buy their own land and can't get planning permission. This situation persists. And also, ultimately, when it comes to people accessing running water, this is a clear human rights issue. It's access to home, access to running water, access to basic sanitation. So it's a wider issue that actually addresses some really fundamental human rights as well. So that's why this comes at such an important time, because as the council roll out their new policy, which has improved, it now includes provision. We still don't have any provision of facilities for people living on the roadside. We actually don't really have many public drinking water taps anymore, public toilets. Like it's actually like something that affects everybody as well, this lack of basic access to amenities. So as they're creating this new policy that they're rolling out at the moment, that is something that's being forgotten about, is the facilities. So it's great that people are being given access to land, but they're only getting cold water and waste collection and portaloos. There still aren't laundry facilities, and there still isn't running hot water. So we really want to start channeling this research into those conversations, because now that vehicle dwellers on those sites are going to start paying council tax, then arguably they should be getting more than just a cold water tap and some bins collected. They should be enjoying the same rights that other people who pay council tax in the city have as well. So that's why it's important that we keep this ball rolling and keep people aware of what's going on.
Great. The last thing, so Lizzie, it's Rhea and I talking today, but Lizzie's here, so maybe can you come here?
Yeah.
Because, yeah, it just feels weird, like, so yeah. It was all a bit rushed, the talk, so in the end it was two of us that took it on. But yeah, is there anything else to say?
I think you've done an amazing job giving an overview of the project.
You need a microphone.
I think you've done an amazing. Is it on? Yeah. Thanks. You've done an amazing job in introducing the project and sharing and really making that strong connection around home. And I think, we talk so much in this project about laundry, and laundry is such a domestic practice. And I think it's been really great reframing and really thinking about the impact of this in terms of home. It's been such an interesting project to work on for so many reasons that you've already touched on. And I think one of the biggest things to sort of sit back in the audience, which is great to hear your project presented, the project you're part of, is just to think about how much the context has shifted in the time that we've been doing this project, and how we are... we've gone from a place which was very much about kind of wanting to celebrate those skills, as you've already talked about, and thinking about all of that really important knowledge that is there. We think about a future where we are going to have less, we're going to need to use our energy in a much more kind of considered ways. We're not going to have as much access to clean water. We all need to think about washing our clothes in different ways, and there is already a community in our city who have really, really deep embedded tacit knowledge around this, and that knowledge isn't often celebrated, and so we started at that kind of point. Through the time that we've been on this project, the project sort of travelled through the cost of living crisis, more and more reports around clothes washing within the home becoming too expensive, too challenging for households, because of the cost of buying laundry detergent, and the cost of running the washing machine. So again, that deep knowledge about how do we do this in a more considered and thought through way takes on even more importance. And then here we find ourselves in 2026, these policy changes that are coming in around vehicle dwelling in the city, and actually, again, very little consideration of how washing is going to happen. So this project kind of, as it progresses and we get deeper into it, it keeps on being kind of challenged by what's going on by the local and national context. And I feel like there's still so much more really to unpack in terms of how valuable valuable this knowledge is going to be for going back to Lara's, how she started this talk. You know, how do we radically reimagine how we live well with our clothes, not turn the washing machine down a little bit? And I think that this project's another opportunity to kind of have a critical conversation about that.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Rhiannon and Lizzie. Do we have any questions from the audience? That's all right. I do it every week.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your talk. I think I was curious if you learned any sort of like life hacks or kind of interesting like ways people had adapted to the constraints, like while you were doing the research. And yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. Yeah, I also have other questions, but that's the first one.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, sorry.
One that I had never come across before, which I have since tried, and I can confirm it does work well, is toothpaste on a bloodstain. Some people, someone that we spoke to kept an old toothbrush for this particular task. And toothpaste on a fresh bloodstain lifts it out really quickly, and it's not something that I had ever come across before. And it was one of the triggers. The menstrual cycle can be one of the triggers within kind of the laundry cycle. And this is a way to manage that better when you're living without a water pipe.
I can also say spitting on blood if you do it, because I imagine it's the same enzymes. You essentially almost you digest it. So try and get as much of I did this yesterday, as much blood out as possible, and then spit, and you almost just watch it dissolve. But yeah, what other stories came out?
Yeah, so there was also what a lot of people did as a tactic is just have like a lot of socks and a lot of pants that you let build up until you can fill a whole laundrette bowl, and just put it all in one go. And that way then you kind of just get it all done in one go. And laundrettes are quite interesting social spaces. You can go along, have a cup of tea, meet all the other people in the area using the laundrette. So it's always quite a nice social experience, very different to the kind of tossing a single garment in after work and then running upstairs, not paying attention, and then, oh yeah, I'll grab that out, wear that tomorrow. Yeah. Very different process.
Things like also wearing dark colours, wearing like actual protective clothing, like wearing overalls, which I guess traditionally would have been, people wore an overcover. You know what I mean? So there's like loads of things like that as well.
Yeah, and what we also picked up, which I think was really, really interesting, we haven't talked about it yet, is this idea of dirty or smelly clothes was really kind of challenged and unpacked in terms of the knowledge around that. So the words that were being used to describe the clothes wouldn't necessarily be like, that's dirty. It would be like, it's got soil on it. And so that meant it was treated in a particular way, or it smells of good human, or it smells of smelly feet. That there was really deep consideration about what was on the clothing and what was the impact that would have, and how and when it could be reused or did need a wash. Data shows that we actually use in houses, that we actually, in many households, use the laundry pile as a way to tidy up the house. That things found on the floor, like, well, I'll stick it in the laundry because then it's off the floor and I'm not having to deal with this. And this is such a different approach, which involves such kind of deep consideration with the material that you're working, the actual material properties of the clothing, and how they're presenting, and how they can be, that kind of washing, the need to wash being slowed down.
Yeah, because it's an attitude thing as well, wasn't it? Mm.
You sort of touched on this idea when you talked about what we used to do with, or what people used to do in terms of just coating themselves in turkey grease and then stitching themselves into their clothes. And I think that really speaks to this huge change in ideas of hygiene. And I'm just wondering if you did actually explicitly address, because our ideas of what's dirty, and you kind of mentioned that there, and the idea of dirt and danger, and obviously marketing people are trying to sell us endless products and tell us we're filthy, especially the ladies, so we're endlessly needing to wash and clean ourselves and our clothes, and that's a big thing to fight against. But I think explicitly this idea about what's hygienic, and you kind of mentioned that about how often we do it and why we wash our clothes, but I think that point about the turkey grease or the goose fat is quite an important one. So I think my question is, how much did you explicitly talk about hygiene and ideas about hygiene?
Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, so it's an interesting one because I don't know if anyone's ever heard the term crusty. So people quite often describe people living in vehicles as being crusty, as a reference to them being kind of like less hygienic, basically, and having crusty bits on their clothes and on their skin. And it's interesting because in a lot of vehicle dwelling and new traveller circles, that's almost kind of like taken on, they've kind of like reappropriated that with pride. It's like, yeah, I'm a crusty. But that's really different because but then other travelling groups would actually be really against that. And they'd be like, no, we're clean. Like, this is a pure, clean space that we're living in. So that's quite an interesting one in itself because there's huge differences between different vehicle dwelling groups. But with the group that we were working with, which was like non-ethnic vehicle dwellers and cultural new travellers, there was like generally, not always, again, it's just so down to the individual. Some people do still like to kind of live by very kind of like mainstream normative ideas about hygiene. But other people have kind of reappropriated what was initially an insult into being a source of pride, of cultural pride. So that's quite an interesting one in relation to like ideas about like hygiene and cleanliness. Yeah.
But one of the things that came up in the laundry workshop was the stigmatization, no? That it became, it was because for some people it's like, for some people the stigma is difficult to live with.
Yeah. Definitely. And interestingly, you notice that a lot more with people that have grown up living in vehicles, so that may have experienced quite a lot of bullying at school, for example. So it really varies, like especially when you start looking at differences between different generations as well.
I'm interested in the circus. So there were some great pictures of the circus practices that you explored. Did the project culminate in any kind of performance, or is there a kind of a choreographed circus piece that is now one of the outputs of this investigation?
Well, that's a good question. So we've got some draft sketches, but they need development. Like it was very kind of just the very beginning of it, and everyone involved was really excited about it and wanted to develop it. So that is what we're looking to do. So watch this space on that one.
And there is that they are on YouTube, so maybe they can go into the link of this talk, so that they can be accessed in that way.
At the end of the funding that we had from Bristol, we did get the chance to perform the draft pieces together to everybody that was been involved in making them. And I just want to add, as someone who's I've never worked in circus before, but it was such an incredibly powerful and an emotional experience seeing this work performed by people who are themselves living in vehicles, and a few people spoke to me at the end saying, I've worked in circus and I've produced so much circus work, but I've not had the opportunity to really talk about my life and the things that are going on in my life in this way through circus. So there's a real kind of excitement to do more work around that, and the film of the draft performances there is still quite raw, but in terms of it's not kind of finished, polished work, but already you can understand that kind of connection between the challenge around the kind of physical embodied utilities that go on within vehicle dwelling and the kind of physicality and embodied experience of circus performing, that they sit very naturally together.
I'm intrigued in how, to flip it on its head, how what you were doing with the research and interviewing and asking people questions, how that was then informing the thought that you were going to turn it into a circus performance, like how like an arts-based kind of research kind of project. How far ahead were you thinking with that kind of circus?
Take that one.
I mean, I wasn't, were you?
Yeah, so it was kind of, we wanted to make it more creative so that it was more accessible and more interesting to people that don't just want to read another report. And then we were thinking of what is so inherently tied to vehicle dwelling. And then with regards to, so we were saying about getting the interviews into the circus. Yeah, so I think we always felt we were going to do some interviews, but it was just how to then express them.
Yeah.
Like the personalities of
So
getting across.
we pulled out themes, didn't we? I think there was like 6 themes, and I guess there were going to be more like prompts, and then in the end, I sadly couldn't make it. I had COVID in the end, and I didn't attend the workshop. But was the themes were the beginnings of a conversation? But then there was already so much laundry knowledge in the room that it was a mix of what was already in the room and what had come through the interviews. Is what I understand. Is that right?
So the themes that were found in the interviews were then developed and taken in their own direction by the performers. So we basically, it was like building on the data, but also doing co-analysis. So they had the opportunity to do like a secondary analysis. Obviously, we had the raw data. I've got to admit that we had that authority. We had the raw data first, and also for ethical reasons. So they built on the data, but then also made a more accessible output, but one that really resonated with them and their own experiences. So some themes were left out for that reason. Yeah.
Hey, someone watching online is interested to know if you picked up any intersections between disability, physical barriers, etc., and laundry, thinking about having to wait a week to be well enough to go to the laundrette.
Yeah. Shall I take this one? Yeah, so that's and this again goes back to, I'd say, mutual aid. Like, people rely on each other a lot. And especially when you have people that like have problems with mobility or have problems, with being able to get out of the house and do this kind of work, there's a lot of mutual support that enables that. But of course, that won't be experienced equally by everyone. There might be a lot of people actually really feeling very unsupported in that respect. But of course, there's so much disparity within vehicle dwelling. Like, there are so many different people that live in vehicles, and there are so many different groups with different dynamics in how they support each other. But I'd say, that's where mutual aid is so essential. That's why I find doing research with vehicle dwellers and living with other vehicle dwellers quite interesting, because there's a real sense of being collective, which I think a lot of people don't feel so much anymore. So I think a lot can be learned in that respect, how people live together in that respect, not just like in one dwelling, but in these dwellings that are separate to each other but connected, and they support each other and enable each other to live the way they live.
So that question kind of half answered my question already. But I was wondering about, because like laundry for van dwellers is quite a specific thing, but I would imagine that it also taught you some wider lessons about wider issues like marginalisation, class divides, climate change, that kind of stuff. That's quite an open-ended question, but... It really, really did. Yeah, it really highlighted a lot of differences. In fact, there was quite an interesting conversation during the workshop where people actually explained their backgrounds, how they'd come into vehicle dwelling. And actually, it was a really important conversation, because actually a lot of people had kind of made assumptions about each other and their backgrounds and where they'd come from. So, it just really revealed the level of diversity and how that affects and shapes everyone's experience of vehicle dwelling all the time. I think class comes up really strongly, because obviously like having the ability to afford a van that you can drive yourself is actually like quite out of reach for a lot of people that are from like lower income backgrounds, for example. So the potential in that respect for how people can live and how well they can live their clothes is so shaped by all these different stratifications within vehicle dwelling. And also, and talking about menstruating as well, like there's loads of things, and disabilities. There are so many different reasons that make vehicle dwelling easier or harder depending on the person. Yeah. Thank you.
Last questions from the audience. No? In that case, we'll say thank you again to Lara and to Rhiannon and to Lizzie, who subbed in. All right, before you all go, please don't forget that today is First Friday, our monthly social event. So from 5 till 7 p.m. today, you can come along to the studio, grab a drink, explore some of the work that our community is making. Before that, if you want to stick around in Hot Desk today or find out more about what we do, then please come find one of the studio team and we'll be happy to help. Here we are. There are just, Vic is over there somewhere, but we're a little thin on the ground today. If you're watching online, drop us a line on studio@watershed.co.uk with any questions. If you like what you've seen here today and you want to help us keep bringing you great talks like this one, please do visit watershed.co.uk/donate. Watershed is a charity. We really do rely on the generosity of our supporters to continue our work. Thank you all for being here today, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks, guys.